England in the early 16th century was an embattled nation. Between religious ferment and political strife stood such a man of unwavering faith, one who would not betray his conviction, even as those convictions cost him his life. That man was Bishop John Fisher. To make any sense at all of the brutal execution of John Fisher, his world needs to be brought into consideration. England was in monumental change. King Henry VIII, desperate for a male heir, broke from the Catholic Church after Pope Clement VII refused to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. This break from Rome ignited the English Reformation, and thus came into existence the Church of England. But this was more than the mere change of allegiance from one religion to another. It was the brazen assertion of kingly power. From this now, new church came the demand that all of King Henry VIII's subjects pledge allegiance to him as its head. All refusals were severely punished. Standing in the way of all this was one John Fisher, Bishop of Rochester. He was no ordinary bishop, intimate with the royal family, an intellectual, and a most religious Catholic. He even served as a tutor to young Prince Henry. Then, when the king insisted that his subjects take loyalty oaths, Fisher refused to betray his faith. In John Fisher's mind, the Catholic Church drew its authority from God, not some earthly ruler. No king could change its sacred doctrines, and Henry VIII proved no exception. And when the price for his defiance became a sentence of imprisonment, Fisher did not budge. His was an act of deep personal conviction, not simple political resistance. As the months rolled by, things between Fisher and the crown went from bad to worse. An incandescent King Henry saw in all this rank treason and the determination to make an example of the bishop. Fisher's reluctance to bend wasn't just a personal affront. It was an affront to Henry's authority as king and spiritual leader of England. Yet Fisher did not stand alone, for one of his more famous fellows in objection was Sir Thomas More, who refused to bow to the king's supremacy over the church just as obstinately. The two thus represented together the last, courageous stand of those who would not betray their conscience for the king's demands. It was June 22nd, 1535, that Bishop John Fisher, after months of being imprisoned within the cold walls of the Tower of London, was led out to his execution. The morning bright above London was a grim mood in the air. The crowds assembled to watch a spectacle that was not an ordinary execution, but a public silencing of a man whose only crime was standing by his faith. Upon the scaffold at Tower Hill, Fisher gallantly kept his dignity intact in a staunch display of courage as his life drew to an end. "I die for the faith of the Holy Catholic Church," he declared to the assembled multitude. It was the axe of the executioner that fell in one swift, brutal stroke and ended Fisher's life. His head was then stuck on a pike over London Bridge, grim warning to all crossing King Henry. But despite the bloodthirsty warning by the king, the death of Fisher sent ripples throughout Europe. Even Pope Paul III protested the execution, having made Fisher a cardinal while he was in prison. Yet one had to remember that the word of the king was law in England. The execution of Fisher proved to be the breaking point, the length to which Henry would go to prove that he was boss both over the church and the state. Bishop John Fisher died a violent death, but his memory lives on. He could have taken the easier route, sworn the oath, and lived out the rest of his days, and no harm would have come to him. But in that act of his decision to cling to his values, even at the cost of life, he transcends the status of a mere historical figure into one of unwavering conviction. Living in a world where compromising often is the easier way out, Fisher's courage in clinging to one's principles at all costs sends us a lesson. Now, as one remembers this poor Bishop John Fisher, brutally executed on behalf of his faith, the question must be begged. Where do we stand? What are we standing up and fighting for when the chances just seem insurmountable? History's strongest men were not the ones who easily and powerfully lived, but those who, with messages and beliefs amidst the world's opposition, stood tall. The story of Bishop John Fisher is but one that simply affirms the fact that conviction, not power, is strong. What will be your legacy? Guided by your principles in adversity, will you stand tall like Bishop John Fisher? History remembers them all, those who had dared to be different and struggled for something right in their eyes. One question that comes into the mind is whether you would be in their league or not. If you believe in the strength of conviction and the importance of standing up for what's right, join the conversation. Share your thoughts in the comments and be sure to like and subscribe for more stories of courage, faith, and the powerful lessons history can teach us. Together, let's create a legacy that will be remembered.